Welcome. Welcome to this course, Mindfulness-Based Addiction Recovery. And I really hope that we have a beneficial month together. I just really wanted to talk about the historical roots of mindfulness. So we know that 2,600 years ago, it's said that the Buddha Siddhartha Gautama gave the teachings of mindfulness. And that first discourse was the Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. And when we think of the Eightfold Path, we think of wisdom, we think of meditation, and we think of ethics. And in that wisdom part, the earliest detailed teachings on mindfulness can be found in the Pali Canon. One of my favorite teachings is the Anapanasati, the practice of mindfulness of breathing. I like to call it mindful of breathing. 16 stages, 4 tetrads. Also, we have the Satipatthana Sutta, which is also 4 stages as well. I think what's really important, it's often said that the prince was actually doing the Anapanasati practice, the mindfulness of breathing, when he woke up to the truth and became awake and became a Buddha. We're never quite sure whether it was the Anapanasati that comes first or the Satipatthana Sutta that comes first, but they're very similar practices. Both practices have 4 stages, and really we're working with mindfulness of the body. Yeah, becoming aware of the body, working with mindfulness of feelings, becoming aware of feelings, and not feeling thoughts, but hedonic tone in the body, tension, expansion in the body, becoming aware of thoughts. The mind loves making thoughts, it produces thoughts, and really becoming aware of mental cognition, becoming aware of also perception, interpretations, and then in that 4th stage, it's the Dharma's mind objects, which is aging, sickness, death, Dharmas, everything which is so important to life. In fact, people often ask me, how am I? And I just say, wow, at this stage in my life, it really is the unfolding of sickness, aging, and death. It seems so much more around us as we get older. So, so this is really important. We have the Anapanasati and we have the Satipatthana, and these practices were seen as essential parts of the Noble Eightfold Path. Really, it's what the core, the when we think of the Noble Eightfold Path, there are 8 stages. I'm not going to go through all the stages, but one of the stages on the path, or one of the limbs on the path, is right mindfulness. And the Anapanasati and the Satipatthana is part of that teaching, right mindfulness. So we have these practices to help us see things as they really are, and that's what we call Vipassana practices, really seeing things as they really are rather than how we want them to be. Vipassana practices is understanding the 3 lakshanas, the 3 marks of human condition, anicca, everything changes, impermanence, dukkha, suffering, anatta, non-self. And it's said that we can gain liberation from this suffering. And if we gain liberation from this suffering, it is nirvana. And I think, when we're working in the field of addiction, this is what we're really looking at, is liberation from suffering. We have to remember that pain is inevitable, mental pain is inevitable, physical pain is inevitable. However, suffering is optional, and how that suffering can be turning towards substances, turning towards behaviors to move away from the pain that we're experiencing, which multiplies the pain and becomes suffering. And as I said, again, it's said that the Prince Siddhartha, that when he sat beneath the Bodhi tree in India, that he was practicing the Anapanasati. And I think this is really important, because often we think, well, how are we going to wake up? What do we need to do? Should we be reading another book? Should we be going on another course, etc.? And what's really clear is that all of us have access to this freedom, have access to this liberation, because the prince was sitting in reflection and meditating. The prince became awake, became a Buddha, and the Buddha rediscovered the way. So it means that even before the Buddha, there would have been mindfulness teachings, because the Buddha rediscovered the way. However, what's important is to the Buddha that we know of, the Buddha came from India, and really to contextualize the practices, because I think often when we're in the West, we think of, oh, mindfulness, it came from the US, or mindfulness, it came from England, etc. However, the roots and the historical roots definitely came from India. And, whether we believe that there was somebody called the prince or not, these teachings came from India. I was at a seminar and there was this debate, was there somebody historically called, Prince Siddhartha, or is it a story that was made up? Whether it was a story that was made up or not, we know that these teachings came from that part of the world. It's also important to say that there are, there are many forms of mind trainings. And again, these mind trainings existed in Hindu texts like the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, and in yoga traditions and in Taoism. And although often the Greeks are credited for the focus on understanding of the mind, mindfulness predates the Greeks, and this is so important and can be traced back to India. So I just really want to really make this really clear. I think what's so interesting is that we have so many healing modalities, and often these healing modalities, the majority of them, even in the West and even in places like the continent of Africa, are healing modalities that come from the Greeks or come from Western Europe. And here we have this healing modality, mindfulness, that actually comes from Asia, comes from India. And I say the whole of Asia because we know that when Buddhism left India, it went into Burma, it went into Japan, it went into Tibet, it went into Korea, and of course it got mixed up with their culture. And so this is what we've inherited here, here in the West. These teachings that branched out into the whole of Asia. And at some point in the 1800s, the Chinese brought Buddhism to the USA in the 1800s during the gold rush. And in the late 1900s, we do begin to see translations of Buddhist texts into English. For example, you have Thomas Rhys David and Caroline Rhys David, who was his wife, who were in Sri Lanka and came across the Satipatthana and became fascinated by it, because it is a fascinating text, fascinated by Buddhist psychology. If you've heard me teach, I often say that Buddhism is the oldest, it's the oldest recovery program that we know of today. It's the oldest therapeutic program that we know of today. If you go into the Abhidharma and the number of mental states that it details, it's just incredible. And then, of course, in the UK, we have the late Sangharakshita, who came back to the UK in around 1964, and founded what was then the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order in 1967, and was very much influenced by Rhys David. And people like Sangharakshita in the UK, people like Jack Cornfield in the US, Sharon Salzberg in the US. There are others who I could name, but these are particular people who made mindfulness accessible to the Western mind. Okay, and when we talk about mindfulness, we can think of we have Vipassana and we have Samatha practices, and so definitely Samatha practices are practices to calm the mind. We can think of the four Brahma Viharas, which is metta, which is sometimes it's called Maitri Bhavana, unconditional loving kindness, unlimited friendliness. We have Karuna, which is compassion, unconditional compassion. We have mudita, which is sympathetic joy, unconditional sympathetic joy for others. And then we have upekkha, or equipoise, upekkha, equanimity, equipoise. Yeah. And these are seen actually as samatha practices, but then really they're not. Samatha and vipassana are part of the same practice. However, when we're beginning to work with people, and especially people in recovery, we really want to come from the samatha place, because many people with addictions, their nervous system is completely out of whack. I just when I think of the Buddha's first discourse, the we can think of the history of when addiction was named, because in the history of Buddhism and addiction, it can be found in the first discourse by the Buddha that speaks of addiction. Like the Buddha said, there is addiction to hedonism that is lowly, coarse, and unprofitable. And there is addiction to self-mortification, which is lowly, coarse, and unprofitable. And then the Buddha expounds the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering. And I think this is really important, because we are working with a community with suffering. Yeah. And I know for myself that I always thought something was wrong with me because I experienced suffering. But when I heard that this first truth, that there was suffering, I was like, wow, I'm not alone. This is normal. Suffering is normal. And then we have the second truth, the cause of suffering, craving, clinging. I like to see that second truth is seeing how we create extra suffering in our lives. And this is the place often where we're working with people in addiction, is just really looking at how perhaps unconsciously or consciously they're creating extra suffering in their life, how they are still on that vicious cycle of addiction, or that hamster. I remember as a kid watching a gerbil or a hamster going around and around and around a wheel, and it fall off, and it go round and around and around and fall off, and it go round and around and around and fall off. And I think, what's happening here? Why is this animal getting back on this wheel? And we're just like that. We're just like humans. We keep on going around and around and falling off, and keep on going around and around and falling off. And hopefully one day that fall, it won't be fatal, but it will be enough to wake us up. Yeah, to do something different. As we know, the Four Noble Truths, it says there can be an end of suffering. Yeah, can be an end of suffering. And the way out of suffering is the Eightfold Path. Yeah. And so we know that these teachings address suffering. These teachings are addressing clinging, addressing craving, addressing attachment. And this is everything, as myself, who's had and still has some addictive behaviors. I mean, I'm not completely free. I mean, they're different. I'd say, you might wonder, what am I addicted to? Sometimes, with certain foods, obviously there is, the attachment, it doesn't control me, but actually, how can I interrupt these cravings? How can I interrupt the compulsions? Yeah. Mm. I also want to say that the monks have been pulling people into the temples for hundreds of years, pulling those people with addictions, with alcoholism. So it's not true. It's not true to say that actually that there's no place for people with addictions, people with alcoholism in Buddhism. There's no place, because Buddhism, the Dharma, isn't therapy. Yeah. And what I want to say to you, if somebody wants to use the Dharma, if somebody wants to use the mindfulness practices as therapy, so be it. It's a doorway. For me, my recovery was in the rooms of mindfulness, was in the rooms of meditation, and it was my therapy. And that's what got me my recovery. Yeah. So I just want to say that the mindfulness-based addiction recovery, MBAR, pulls from the mindfulness teachings, pulls from the Buddhist teachings to focus on recovery rather than relapse. You might be familiar with the mindfulness-based relapse prevention. So really want to talk about this because I heard a fantastic talk by a common Lafay, and he was talking about care, this thing of care. And I would say that actually the mindfulness-based relapse prevention, lots of great teachings in it. However, the title mindfulness-based relapse prevention was named in terms of care, but actually, was it really care? Really? Because actually, if people relapse, they gave themselves such a hard time, and many people wouldn't continue because this course was about preventing relapse. So in a way, what we see is that recovery is important, and relapse is part of recovery. So if you relapse, it's part of recovery. In fact, the fact that you've relapsed is the opportunity to do something different, the opportunity to really get yourself off that vicious cycle of addiction. We do separate on the course between a slip and a relapse, okay? However, you know, if one relapses, it's to be kind to yourself, it's to be gentle to yourself. And I just want, you know, for all of you to really think about what do you think is the best modality? Because we have the medical model. Has that really been a caring model? Yeah. We have the war on drugs model. Has that really been a caring model? We have what would say alternative therapies, narrative therapy, internal family systems, compassionate inquiry, all those different therapies. Is that caring? Is that caring? Or yoga or meditation, etc. And we really need to think about that because definitely we have the legal system being caring to our clients. It's like punish the drug dealer, incarcerate the drug dealer. We call people addicts, we call people junkies, we talk about people being clean and dirty. This isn't caring language. So I really want you to think about how you begin to change your language about yourself. Yeah. So if you're somebody on this course where you're doing this for yourself, are you calling yourself an addict or an alcoholic? And what I want to say to you is I don't want to take that away from you because especially if you're in the rooms of 12 steps, I know that this is really an important reminder, a reminder that just to remind you that you can't drink or you can't use the substance that you've been using. However, I want to say to you that, okay, if you want to call yourself an addict, an alcoholic, then do, but please call yourself a father, a mother, a sibling, a brother, a sister. Please call yourself a bus driver, a banker, or a shopkeeper, or whatever your job is. Please expand your identities, yeah, so that we're not just fixed on this one identity. So important to open up the aperture, okay, and that is quite compassionate. And to remember that, you know, if somebody's diabetic and needs to give themselves more insulin, we don't call them dirty. We don't chastise them. We care about them. Really care about yourself. And those of you who are perhaps doing this because you're interested in the field or you work in the field or you have a relative who is struggling with addiction, think about the language you use. Think about how you can be more caring. I really want you to do these 28 days for you. Yeah, that is so important. Just do it for you. Okay. And I also will do it for me as I journey with you. I look forward to seeing some of you, maybe all of you, when we do the live sessions together. I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care. Blessings. Blessed be.